There is something about the Christmas season that makes people believe, even just for a little while, that the world is a kinder place. The air gets a little crisper. The lights come on a little earlier each evening. Familiar songs drift out of shops and restaurants. Neighbors who barely acknowledge each other the rest of the year suddenly wave and smile across snow-dusted driveways. Children go to bed earlier than usual, buzzing with a kind of magic that only comes once a year. And adults, even the most cynical among us, feel something soften inside, something warm and hopeful rising up in the chest like the glow of a candle in a dark window. We decorate, we bake, we wrap presents late at night when the house is finally quiet, whispering to ourselves that this year everything will be perfect. We tell ourselves that Christmas is safe, that it is warm, that it is full of goodwill and kindness and joy. But here is the thing that nobody puts on a Christmas card. The truth that hides underneath all those twinkling lights and ribbon-wrapped boxes. Christmas, perhaps more than any other time of year, has a way of bringing out the very best in some people and the absolute worst in others. The pressure of the season, the forced closeness, the expectations that pile up like snow on a rooftop, all of it creates the perfect conditions for things to go sideways. Sometimes badly sideways, sometimes in ways that follow you for years, long after the decorations have been packed away and the tree has been taken to the curb. The stories you are about to hear tonight are real. They were shared by real people, ordinary men and women who sat down to tell what happened to them during what was supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year, and not one of them could have predicted what was coming. A coworker who crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. A stranger in a Santa suit running wild on a rooftop in the middle of the night. A holiday gift drive hiding something truly disturbing beneath the cheerful wrapping paper. A Christmas potluck meal that nearly ended in tragedy. And a mystery that took years to unravel. A neighbor whose blasting Christmas music turned out to be a desperate cry for help. A father who fought to protect his family in a snowy forest far from home. Another father who nearly bled out on a sidewalk over a toy. And a young woman trapped alone in her car during one of the worst blizzards in recent memory, convinced she was never going to see another Christmas morning. These are their stories, and I promise you, not one of them is going to go the way you expect. So get comfortable. Make yourself a cup of something warm, pull a blanket over your lap, and stay with me because tonight we are going to talk about Christmas in a way that nobody sings about on the radio. And if you are new here and you found your way to this channel tonight, welcome. Please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. We are so glad you are here. Now, let us begin. Story 1. The worst Secret Santa gift in history. I am going to be careful about naming the company I used to work for, but I will tell you this much. It was a good-sized place with several departments, and each department had its own office space. The people in my department were a solid group. We got along well, we supported each other, and one of the traditions that we all genuinely looked forward to every single year was Secret Santa. It was one of those things that just worked. Everyone put in the effort, everyone got something thoughtful, and for one afternoon each December, the office felt genuinely warm and festive and fun. That was true every single year, right up until 2015, because 2015 was the year that a man I am going to call Chryson was assigned to buy my gift. Now, I want to be clear. At the time, I had absolutely no idea it was Chryson who had drawn my name. That was the whole point of the exercise. We were not supposed to find out who had bought for whom until we had taken our gifts home, opened them in private, and then come back to work the following day for the big reveal. The mystery was part of the fun. It was supposed to be lighthearted and sweet. I had been assigned to buy for a woman named Margaret, a kind older lady who had been with the company for many years and who everyone knew had a deep love for bath products, things like bath bombs and fancy soaps and that sort of thing. She was genuinely easy to shop for, and I felt good about what I had picked out for her. And honestly, I figured I would be just as easy to buy for. I was a woman in my mid-20s. There were 1,000 thoughtful things anyone could have grabbed for me without much effort at all. When I collected my Secret Santa gift from the exchange, it felt like a framed picture. I could feel the cool smoothness of glass on one side when I gently pressed against it. It had been wrapped rather carelessly, and there was a fragile sticker stuck to the front of it, so I handled it carefully on the drive home, making sure it stayed flat and protected on the back seat. When I finally got home that evening, I had a few things to deal with before I got to opening it. The most pressing was ending a relationship. I had been seeing someone I had met on a dating app, and what had started out feeling promising had very quickly turned into something uncomfortable. He had become far too attached far too quickly, and the clinginess had crossed a line into something that genuinely unsettled me. I put on my courage and called him on the phone rather than sending a text or an email, because I felt I owed him at least a proper conversation. It was not an easy call, but it was the right thing to do. I poured myself a glass of wine to let my nerves settle, and by the time I finally remembered the gift sitting on my kitchen table, I was in a sort of soft, melancholy, slightly floaty headspace. Not unhappy exactly, just quiet, reflective, maybe a little emotionally wrung out from the earlier phone call. I unwrapped the gift carefully, mindful of the fragile sticker on the front, and then I just stood there and stared at it. For a moment I genuinely wondered if my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was a framed photograph, a large one, professionally printed and set in what was actually quite a nice frame. The photo itself showed a young, attractive couple standing on a sun-drenched beach. The man was wearing a tiny swimsuit, the kind that leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination. The woman was wearing what can only be described as an extremely minimal bikini in the most eye-watering shade of neon pink you have ever seen. The kind of swimwear where the fabric is so sheer that it barely qualifies as clothing at all, the kind where you are essentially looking at the person rather than the garment. Now, I am not here to judge anyone's personal fashion choices. People can wear whatever they like on their own time. But the reason I was standing in my kitchen with my mouth hanging open was not the swimwear. It was the faces. Because my face, my actual face, clearly cut from a photo of me and pasted over the woman's head in the most amateur sloppy Photoshop job you have ever laid eyes on, was sitting atop this near-naked model's body. The match was spectacularly bad. I am a very pale woman with nearly black hair. The model was tan, blonde, and athletic. No effort whatsoever had been made to blend the skin tones or match the hair. You could still see a thin strip of the model's blonde hair peeking out from behind my own head. It looked ridiculous. It looked disturbing. It looked like something a very troubled person would spend an evening creating, and the man in the Speedo? That was Chryson's face, photoshopped onto the man's body, complete with Chryson's signature in the corner of the photograph, written in thick black marker. I stood there for a very long time just trying to process what I was looking at. My first instinct was that it had to be a prank. One of the women at work, maybe. They had expressed some feelings about Chryson before. Maybe this was their way of being funny, edgy. A little mean-spirited, sure, but a joke. But even as I tried to convince myself of that, something in me knew it was not a prank. The signature was too careful. The whole thing felt too deliberate, too personal, too strange. I left the photo on my desk that night and tried not to think about it, knowing I would have the answer the following day. And the answer was exactly as bad as I had feared. When our department gathered at lunchtime for the secret Santa reveal, and everyone shared who their gift was from, mine turned out to have come from Chryson, and when he looked at me across the table with a face full of genuine, earnest anticipation, and asked if I had liked his gift, like he actually expected me to say yes, like he thought he had done something wonderful, I froze completely. I know what I should have done. I should have taken that photo out of my bag right then and placed it on the table for everyone to see. I should have gone directly to HR and filed a formal report. Chryson had seniority over me in the company, and he had a friendly relationship with the manager above, and I felt embarrassed in a way that was deeply unfair given that I was the victim here, not the one who had done anything wrong. But in that moment, with everyone looking at me and Chryson wearing that eager, hopeful expression, I panicked. I told him it was sweet and thoughtful, and when it came time for people to share their gifts, I pretended I had left mine at home and described it vaguely as a photo of the two of us, and then changed the subject as fast as I possibly could. I know. You are probably shaking your head right now, and you would be completely right to. It was a terrible decision. It was the kind of decision that is easy to judge from the outside, and very hard to make correctly when you are standing in the middle of it, blindsided by something so bizarre and inappropriate that your brain simply cannot keep up with what is happening. That night, I dismantled the photo. The frame itself was genuinely lovely. High quality, heavy, the kind you could actually use for something nice, so I kept that. But I tore the photograph itself into the smallest pieces I could manage, taking special care with the parts that I found most disturbing, and making absolutely sure that any trace of my own face attached to that body was destroyed beyond recognition. Then I shoved the pieces into the trash bag, carried the bag outside and put it into the outdoor bin. The further that image was from me, the better. I thought that was the end of it. I truly did. And for a few days, life at work seemed perfectly normal. Chryson behaved like nothing had happened at all. And then, several days later, I was in the break room making myself a coffee When I heard the door open behind me, I did not even look up at first. I just called out a casual greeting, assuming it was one of my colleagues. I felt his breath on my cheek before he said a single word. He grabbed me and spun me around to face him. His face was red and twisted with anger in a way I had never seen from him before, and his fingers were digging painfully into my arm. He wanted to know why I had thrown his gift in the trash. The question hit me like ice water, because how on earth did he know that? I had thrown it away at home, in my own garbage. How could he possibly know? I started to stammer out some kind of response, not even knowing where to begin. He squeezed my arm harder and demanded an answer again. And that is when the shock turned to anger. I shoved him back away from me with everything I had and told him exactly what I thought of his gift and of him. I used words I'm not going to repeat here, but the message was clear. His gift had been disgusting, inappropriate, and completely unwanted. And then I asked him, because I genuinely needed to know, how he had found out I had thrown it away. His answer was delivered as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. He told me that he had suspected I might throw it out, so he had been checking my garbage. He had been going through my personal rubbish bin, at my home, my private residence. I barely had time to process the horror of that before the conversation escalated into something far more terrifying. Creason tried to gaslight me, insisting that the photo was innocent, that I was the one who had made it inappropriate, that a couple standing together on a beach was not inherently sexual, and that whatever I had read into it was my own problem. And before I could respond to any of that, he grabbed me, completely without warning, and began trying to force my face toward the stovetop, which I had just finished using to heat water for tea. The burner was still hot. He was screaming something about what I would look like without my face, something deranged and disconnected from reality about vanity and consequences. I screamed for help, as loud as I could, over and over. The door burst open. The department manager, a man named Greg, came through it so hard that he had to use a fire extinguisher to force it. Because Creason, I later realized, had locked us in from the inside. He had planned this. This was not a spontaneous rage. He had locked that door. Greg pulled Creason off me and put him down with a punch to the side of the head that knocked him completely unconscious. And when Greg explained himself later, what he told me was chilling. He said that he had heard enough through the door to know something serious was happening. But more than that, Creason had been quietly bragging to some of the male colleagues that the secret Santa gift he was preparing for an unnamed female coworker was going to make her come straight to him. He had planned the whole thing. From the beginning, Creason was fired. He was fired despite his connections to management, because when it came down to it, there was a security camera in that break room, and it had recorded everything. He was charged for the assault, and through some miracle of a lenient justice system, received only a suspended sentence. But from what I heard through the grapevine over the years that followed, the whole incident, the firing, the criminal record, the reputation, followed him for a very long time. I stayed at that company. I was eventually promoted into Greg's position when he moved further up the ladder, and I have never regretted staying for a single day. We still do Secret Santa every year in that department. We decided as a group that we were not going to let one disturbed individual ruin a tradition that meant something to all of us. We do tell new employees about the incident, in vague terms, without mentioning that I was the one it happened to, and without using any real names. Just as a gentle reminder that workplace gift-giving comes with certain responsibilities and certain boundaries. Because, as it turns out, a Secret Santa gift is absolutely not the path to someone's heart. If you are new here and you are enjoying these stories so far, please take a second right now and click that subscribe button. It means the world to us, and we release new stories regularly, so you will not want to miss what is coming next. Story 2. The Man on the Roof in the Santa Suit. At the time this happened, I was a woman in my mid-20s living alone for a stretch. My boyfriend and I shared a small, cozy, single-story house, but he had been away for work and was not due back until Christmas Eve. The house was all decorated, the tree was up, the lights were strung. The whole place looked and smelled like Christmas, and I was genuinely excited for him to come home and see it all. I was spending the days in the lead-up to Christmas Eve doing what most people do when they are home alone in winter. I was shuffling around in my pajamas, eating whatever I wanted, watching whatever I felt like on television, and generally just enjoying the quiet before the holiday festivities began. I honestly cannot remember exactly what I was watching on the evening it started, probably something I had been complaining about online, because I have a habit of watching shows I actively dislike and then narrating my grievances about them to anyone who will listen. A friend had called me that evening, and we were deep in a long, rambling conversation about nothing in particular, the show, mutual friends, whatever was happening in our lives, when I mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that I thought I had heard footsteps on the roof. She thought that was hilarious. She made a joke about Santa arriving early to slide his sack down my chimney. We laughed about it and moved on. Now, I want to be clear. At that point, I was not particularly worried. Houses make strange sounds. Old ones and new ones alike shift and settle, especially when the temperature drops. There could have been an animal up there, a squirrel maybe, looking for somewhere warm to spend the night. I was not about to get worked up over a few thumping sounds from above, but when my friend and I hung up and I settled back into my show, I heard it again. This time, there was no mistaking it. These were not settling sounds or animal sounds. These were footsteps. Clear, deliberate, rhythmic footsteps moving back and forth across the roof of my single-story home. And then, and this is where it started to feel genuinely unsettling, the footsteps changed. Whatever was up there stopped pacing and started moving in circles. Fast, frantic circles. Like something running laps. I stood up, wrapped my winter coat around myself over my pajamas, and went outside to look. I could not see anything. For one thing, it was dark. For another, I am 5 feet 3 inches tall and the roofline was not exactly at eye level for me. I would have needed to get the ladder out of the garage, drag it into the snow, and climb it in the dark and the cold, and I was not prepared to do that on the off chance that there was actually someone up there. Besides, I reasoned, what real harm could someone do just by being on a roof? Famous last words, because the moment I stepped outside and looked up, something changed. Whatever was on my roof apparently spotted me. And that was when things escalated from unsettling to absolutely terrifying. The running started again, but this time it was frantic, manic. Whoever was up there was sprinting back and forth like a caged animal, making so much noise that I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my shoes. This continued for a solid half hour. I went back outside a second time to look, and that is when I finally saw him. He was wearing a Santa suit, a dirty, ragged Santa suit that had clearly seen better days. He was thin in a way that was alarming, the kind of thin that tells you something has gone very wrong in a person's life. And the moment he saw me standing below him on my lawn, he pointed directly at me and began to scream. He told me I was on the naughty list. He told me that was why he had been running around on my roof for the past 2 hours. He seemed to believe, completely genuinely, that this was a reasonable explanation for his behavior. I pulled my phone out of my coat pocket, thank goodness I had it with me, and I called the police right there on my lawn while keeping eye contact with him. I told him, calmly and clearly, that the police were on their way. He paused for a moment. He seemed to process this information. He looked off into the distance thoughtfully, the way someone might when they are considering their options. And then he started running laps again. And then he charged toward the edge of the roof, launched himself into the air, and performed an actual front flip as he jumped across the gap to my neighbor's roof. He made it, cleanly. And then I watched, genuinely stunned, as he continued sprinting across the rooftops of the neighborhood, leaping from house to house, disappearing further and further into the darkness. When the police arrived, I pointed them in the direction he had gone and gave them what description I could, still standing on my lawn in my pajamas and winter coat and trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. About 30 minutes later, a squad car drove slowly past my house. I looked into the back window and saw a thin, exhausted figure in a battered red suit slumped against the seat, looking as sad as anyone I have ever seen. A short while after that, a police officer knocked on my door. A woman, very kind, who explained what had happened. The man was well known locally. He struggled deeply with addiction, specifically crack cocaine and methamphetamine. But he had wanted to do something good for Christmas. He had wanted to be Santa for a night. The problem, of course, was that he could not afford any gifts, so his plan had been to run across rooftops and make enough noise that children inside would think Santa was really up there, making his rounds. He had also, the officer mentioned, been dropping small bags of drugs down the chimneys of several homes along his route. I was very glad I did not have a chimney. As for how they finally caught him, the officer smiled when she told me, for all his incredible parkour skills, his eyesight was not so good in the dark. After one particularly ambitious leap, he had run face first directly into a chimney at full speed and knocked himself completely unconscious. The police and the fire department brought him down. The paramedics checked him over, and he was taken in. I truly hope he found his way to some kind of help. There was something almost heartbreaking about the whole thing, underneath all the terror. He had wanted to do something kind in the only way he knew how. When my boyfriend came home on Christmas Eve and I told him the whole story, he refused to believe me for nearly an hour, and then when he finally accepted that yes, this was actually something that happened to his girlfriend while he was away, his biggest complaint was that he had missed it. We had a wonderful Christmas that year despite everything, and I have thought about Meth Santa every December since. If you hear footsteps on your roof this Christmas, it might be the jolly man in red. Or it might be someone else entirely. These days, you genuinely never know. Story 3. What someone put in the children's gift box. I really cannot wrap my mind around the kind of person who wants to hurt children. I have thought about it, and I simply cannot find a way to understand it. People who are determined to cause pain and fear in children, especially children who are already dealing with difficult lives and very little to feel hopeful about, represent something in human nature that I find deeply troubling and genuinely hard to look at directly. This story is about the first time I volunteered for a holiday toy collection for children in need. And it is about what someone hid inside one of the donated gifts. If you have ever seen people online complaining that toy donation drives are too strict, that they refuse perfectly good second-hand items, that they insist on brand new sealed products, that they seem ungrateful for donations that are not quite up to their standards, I want you to keep reading, because there are very real, very serious reasons for every single one of those policies. And this story is one of them. The toy collection I was part of at the time was not an official, well-organized national program. It was a small, hastily put-together initiative driven by local town officials. It had good intentions, but it lacked the structure and oversight that would have made it safer. And because of that, we made mistakes that we never should have made. We accepted open, used products. We accepted donations that had already been wrapped up in gift paper by the donor, ready for a child to open. We thought we were being flexible and welcoming. We thought we were being grateful. We were being dangerously naive. It happened about a week before Christmas. I was carrying a stack of wrapped gifts to the storage room when I felt a sudden sharp stab of pain in the palm of my hand. Something inside one of the packages had pierced right through the wrapping and jabbed me. I set everything down carefully on a table, and when I examined the box in question, I could see a needle protruding from one corner. A small, thin needle had pushed its way through the cardboard and through the paper. My first instinct, honest to goodness, was not to panic about what might be on that needle. My first instinct was simply, why is there a needle inside a child's gift? When I carefully opened the box, I found the answer. And it was horrible. The box was filled with used syringes. They looked like the kind used for insulin injections. Every single cap had been removed from every single one of them. Any child who had excitedly torn into that wrapping paper on Christmas morning would have been stabbed multiple times by exposed needle tips. My supervisors were called in immediately. They insisted I go to the emergency room right away. I promised I would. But first, I asked if we could go through the other pre-wrapped donations together before I left. I will skip to the end of my own part of the story quickly. The syringes were clean. I was unharmed. The needles had never been used, and there was nothing in my blood work to worry about. I was fine, and I am fine now. But what we found in those other packages was not fine at all. We identified 4 other gifts wrapped in the same paper as the syringe box. We hoped it was a coincidence since it was a popular design. Only one of those 4 turned out to be legitimate, a children's jigsaw puzzle that was perfectly appropriate and exactly what it claimed to be. The other 3 were something else entirely. The first was a copy of a well-known children's picture book, a classic, the kind most of us know from childhood. The first few pages were normal, but after that, someone had painstakingly glued explicit adult images over every single illustration in the book, graphic ones, the kind that no child should ever lay eyes on, and certainly not presented inside what looked like a beloved storybook. The second was a doll that had been modified in ways I am not going to describe in detail. It had been placed back in its original box with a small blanket tucked around it to hide what had been done to it. It looked completely innocent at a glance. It was not. The third was a high-quality, expensive teddy bear, beautiful on the outside, soft and clean and cheerful. But one of my colleagues noticed something odd about the stitching on its back. It was slightly off, slightly too deliberate. We did not open it ourselves. We called the police and handed everything over to them. And we were told afterward that the bear had been hollowed out and filled with a medical blood bag containing pig's blood. This happened in the 90s. Security was lax. We had no cameras. We had no vetting process. And we never found out who was responsible. That person was never identified and never caught. The damage to our little community was enormous. We had already received very few donations, and the small collection of gifts we had been putting together for children at the local orphanage had felt meaningful and hopeful. Now it was contaminated, destroyed, and the children we had been trying to help would go without. We pushed for reform. We proposed that going forward, we would only accept new sealed toys. We proposed refusing any pre-wrapped items whatsoever. But the town decided instead that the whole initiative had been compromised beyond saving, and it was canceled entirely. I still think about those children every Christmas. I still think about whoever sat down and deliberately planned to harm them, and I hope, with everything in me, that they face consequences for what they did, in this life or the next. If you ever find yourself tempted to push back against donation programs that seem too picky or too demanding, please remember this story. Those rules exist because of real people who have done real and terrible things in the name of holiday giving. The strictness is not ingratitude, it is protection. If something like this has ever touched your life, a moment of genuine, unexpected darkness during what was supposed to be a joyful season, please share your thoughts with us in the comments. We read every single one. This community is a kind and thoughtful one, and your voice matters here. Story 4, The Peanut Meatloaf Mystery. I worked for a number of years in a small craft shop, and it was a genuinely lovely little place to spend your working days. The staff was close. We all got along well, the way people do when they spend enough hours together in a small space, like a family, honestly, with all the warmth and occasional friction that comes with it. Every Christmas, we did a potluck party. Everyone brought a dish, we gathered somewhere comfortable, we ate and talked and laughed. And the year this story takes place, the assistant manager, a woman I will call Janine, offered to host the gathering at her own home. 4 weeks before the party, the emails started arriving. Janine was a planner, a thorough, detail-oriented planner. She sent us update after update about the menu, who was bringing what, how to make sure everything would be coordinated and perfect. And there was one single theme running through every single email she sent us, underlined and repeated without exception. Janine was allergic to peanuts, not mildly allergic, not inconveniently allergic, fatally, dangerously, deathly allergic, the kind of allergy where accidental exposure is a genuine medical emergency. She emphasized this constantly. She asked each of us to promise, repeatedly, that our dishes would be entirely free from any peanut contamination. No peanut oils, no peanut butter, nothing even cooked in the same pan as peanuts. She was thorough and she was serious, and we all understood completely. The day of the party arrived. All 8 of us, 7 women and 1 man, a wonderfully entertaining fellow named Bruce, who had the kind of personality that fills a room, gathered around Janine's extended dining table. Carol, the shop owner, and our big boss, arrived already slightly tipsy from the taxi ride over, which was both alarming and deeply endearing, like watching your grandmother get a little silly at a family gathering. Janine's husband had laid out all the food while we had drinks in the living room, and then he headed out for the evening. The spread was beautiful, everything smelled wonderful. We were all laughing, talking, complimenting each other's dishes. Bruce was in the middle of one of his incredible stories from his New York City years, and we were all so wrapped up in the laughter and the warmth of the evening that none of us noticed the thing we should have noticed. There were 9 dishes on that table. We were 8 people. There should have been 8 dishes. None of us caught it. Not a single one. We ate. Everything was delicious. And then Janine began to cough. The cough turned into something worse. Her face began to swell. Her eyes went wide with the specific, unmistakable terror of a person who knows exactly what is happening to their body and understands what it means. She was clawing at the table, reaching toward her water glass, trying to force out the word EpiPen in a voice that was barely more than a croak. Nobody knew where she kept her EpiPen in the house. We were strangers in her home. We were all looking at each other in a panic when Carol, our slightly tipsy boss, the last person any of us expected, reached into her handbag and produced an EpiPen. She had carried one for years, she explained afterward, because she employed someone with a severe allergy, and she had always felt it was her responsibility as the boss to be prepared. Carol administered the injection. The swelling stopped. Janine started to breathe again. We called an ambulance anyway, and she was taken to the hospital and treated. When the doctors assessed her, they were clear about one thing: her reaction had been severe, too severe for trace contamination or accidental exposure. She had consumed a significant amount of peanuts. Someone at that table had served her a dish containing enough peanuts to kill her. Janine was right to involve the police. It had to be deliberate. After everything she had done to warn every single one of us, the odds of this being an accident were essentially 0. The investigation pointed to the meatloaf, the 9th dish, the one that nobody had brought, the one that had simply appeared on the table. It had been loaded with ground peanuts, enough to be deeply, deliberately harmful, and slowly, horribly, we all began to look at each other differently. We went back to work after the holiday break and nothing was the same. Janine made comments, quiet ones, loaded ones, that made it clear she thought one of us had done it. Bruce, who had always been the joker, was suddenly no longer funny. He was a suspect. Carol, who had so conveniently produced an EpiPen from her purse, became a source of whispers. Maybe she had wanted to make a point. Maybe she had wanted to scare Janine, not kill her, and had come prepared to stop it from going too far. It was poisonous. That is the only word for it. The suspicion spread through the shop like something rotting, and none of us could escape it. Every time we thought we had moved past it, someone would bring it up again, and the whole awful cycle would begin once more. Janine eventually had to leave. And then Carol, quietly devastated by what had happened to something she had built over so many years, announced that she was retiring and that the shop would be closing. The stock was sold off, the doors shut, and just like that, something that had once felt like a second family was gone. We never found out who had done it while we were all still together. It was years later, after everything had ended, that Janine sent us all a long, apologetic email explaining what she had discovered. Her husband, Paul, was now her ex-husband. In one of their final arguments, he had let something slip about the meatloaf. It had been him all along. He had prepared it that afternoon while Janine was at work, ground the peanuts into it carefully and deliberately, and placed it on the table himself while we were all having drinks in the other room. His plan had been to let one of Janine's colleagues take the blame for her death. There was not enough evidence to bring charges. But Janine made sure to include in her divorce proceedings that her husband had attempted to poison her with peanuts. And that, as far as anyone could tell, was the only justice that was ever served. I do not know what became of most of the people from that shop. I know that Carol retired to Florida and that she passed away during the pandemic, not from the virus as it turned out, but from being struck by a bus. A strange and sad ending for someone who had built something good and watched it crumble through no fault of her own. I think about that Christmas party sometimes, about how close it all came, about how one person's quiet, calculated cruelty managed to destroy trust between 8 people who had genuinely cared about each other. And I can tell you with complete certainty that I will never agree to a potluck dinner with any of them ever again. Story 5. Wonderful Christmas Time on repeat. I should start by saying that Ronnie is one of my closest friends in the world. He is sitting right here next to me as I write this, and he has been encouraging me to share the whole story, including the parts that make me look bad. He especially enjoys that part. Here's the thing about Ronnie. When I first moved in next door to him, I was 27, recently divorced, newly settled into the house my parents had left to me. He was a lot to deal with. He was cheerful, he was loud, he was a middle-aged man who had emerged from his own divorce with an almost aggressive enthusiasm for life. He was the neighborhood gossip. He was always in the middle of some project that involved power tools at hours that seemed slightly too early or slightly too late. His family gatherings were boisterous. His grandchildren were energetic in a way that carried through walls. And he wanted to be everyone's friend. Specifically, he wanted to be my friend, and living right next door to him meant that I did not have a lot of ways to politely decline. I attended his cookouts. I went to his movie nights in the basement home theater he had built, which I will admit was actually impressive. I stood in the driveway while he showed me the recliners he had refurbished and the benches he had built and the paintings he had framed. He gave us his projects as gifts, these lovingly made, noisy, slightly imperfect creations that he was genuinely proud of. I was polite about all of it, but privately I found him overwhelming, too big, too loud, too much. Ronnie did everything larger than life, and this applied to holidays above all else. The moment October arrived, his house became a full Halloween production. December 1st, Christmas. He would spend the entire day stringing up lights, positioning animatronic figures, arranging a rooftop Santa display that was genuinely spectacular enough to make people slow their cars down as they passed the neighborhood. He broke multiple HOA regulations every single year with his decorations. The HOA never said a word to him. If you understand anything about homeowner associations, you understand exactly how beloved a person has to be for them to look the other way. I had made my peace with all of it mostly. I had bought myself a sleep mask. I had accepted Ronnie as part of life in this neighborhood. And then came Christmas Eve, and I was lying in bed at nearly 11:30 at night when I heard it. Wonderful Christmas Time. Paul McCartney, coming from Ronnie's house at a volume that I can only describe as inconsiderate. I waited for it to end. It did not end. It started again, and again, and again. By the 5th playthrough, lights were coming on in other houses around the neighborhood. I could see people silhouetted in their windows, looking out. By the 9th repetition, the song was loud enough to make my window panes vibrate. I pulled on my coat and my boots and I went outside. From my vantage point, I could not see Ronnie's front porch directly. Our houses are positioned at an angle, and you have to actually walk around to the front of his property to see the door. So when I crossed onto his lawn and got my first clear view, what I saw stopped me cold. One of his light-up Santa decorations had been smashed, not fallen over, smashed deliberately, and his front door was wide open. I thought about going back for my gun. Something told me there was no time. Instead, I grabbed a wood-splitting axe that was resting against his firewood pile, and I went inside. The interior of Ronnie's house was in chaos. Things had been pulled off walls, drawers had been opened and emptied, pictures had been ripped from their frames and thrown to the floor. Someone had torn through the place looking for something specific. I followed the sound of the music into the living room. I will never forget what I saw. Ronnie was propped against the cabinet housing his old stereo system, somehow wedged in place by the collar of his shirt, which had caught on the edge of the cabinet and was the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes were drifting in and out of focus. His hand was resting on the volume knob, his fingers slick with blood. He had been trying to turn it up loud enough to get someone, anyone, to come. Both of his legs were broken. One of them was broken so severely that I could see the bone. One of his arms was also broken. The only arm he could move at all was the one with which he had been slowly, desperately turning that volume dial over and over for as long as it took. His face was unrecognizable. What I later found out was an aluminum baseball bat had been used on him, and it had been used repeatedly. I looked for his phone. Ronnie started acting frantic, his eyes moving toward the ceiling, toward upstairs. And then I heard it. Footsteps above my head. Whoever had done this was still in the house. I will not try to explain or justify what I did next. I simply did it. I tightened my grip on that axe and went up the stairs. The man I found upstairs was smaller than me by quite a bit. He was wearing a ski mask and going through Ronnie's belongings, clearly searching for a safe. I did not announce myself. I did not issue a warning. I flipped the axe in my hands and cracked him in the side of the head with the handle with everything I had. He turned around. He had a gun. I swung again. Hit him with the metal butt of the axe this time. He went down. I took the gun. And then, working fast, I grabbed every computer cable I could find in Ronnie's office and tied the man up as thoroughly and tightly as my old Boy Scout training would allow. Then I sat on the couch with the gun aimed at him and waited. And eventually one of the neighbors found me there and the police came, and the rest was handled by people more qualified than me. The intruder was Ronnie's estranged son. He had come on Christmas Eve, the night he calculated his father would be alone and unprepared, to steal from him and leave him for dead. Ronnie decided that I had saved his life and that he owed me accordingly. He made himself a permanent fixture in mine, and the strange thing was, I found that I did not mind at all. I actually liked Ronnie enormously once I stopped being overwhelmed by him. We became the kind of friends who tell each other everything, who show up without being asked, who make each other laugh even when things are hard. His injuries changed his life in permanent ways. He uses a wheelchair now. He cannot host the neighborhood parties and manage the Christmas decorations the way he used to. So I help him. My wife helps him. My daughter, who is 2 years old and calls him Uncle Ron, has already appointed herself his enthusiastic assistant with the string lights. His son will be in prison for a long time. Ronnie refused to leave that house, and honestly, I am glad. He is one of the best people I have ever known. And I feel genuine shame when I think about how much I resented him in those early years simply for being warm and generous and full of life. He says it is my penance to share that part whenever I tell this story. And Ronnie loves a good penance. There is one rule between us now, the only firm rule we have ever established in our friendship. Never again will we listen to Wonderful Christmas Time. That song can stay in someone else's Christmas. Like this video if any of these stories hit close to home, and share it with the people in your life who love a good Christmas story. We would love for our community to keep growing. Story 6, Dad's Christmas Tree Adventure, as told by the man himself, a note from the person writing this, I am the son in this story. My father told it to me so many times when I was growing up that I practically have it memorized. I offered to write it out for him, and he agreed on the condition that it be told from his point of view, in his own words. So what follows is my father's story, as he dictated it to me. He is 65 years old. He does not fully understand the internet. He believes that all online video content is hosted by one single person. Here he is. Right then. Hello to whoever is listening to this. My son tells me you are probably not Markiplier, and I have accepted that, even if I do not entirely understand it. Just the same, this happened years ago. Our family made the ill-advised decision to get a real Christmas tree that year. And I will tell you right now, do not bother. It is messy, it drops needles everywhere, and as it turns out, it can lead to the kind of incident that is about to follow. My wife, my son, the one writing this down, the little traitor, and I drove out to a section of national forest where Christmas tree cutting was perfectly legal with the appropriate permit. I want to be very clear about that. Perfectly legal. I had done my research, I had the paperwork. We parked and walked into the trees, and it did not take me long to find exactly what I was looking for. The ideal tree. Tall, full, straight, magnificent. I got the axe out and set to work like a man who absolutely knows what he is doing with an axe. I was making impressive progress, and then I heard a voice. I would describe it as a horrified screech. 2 people came pushing through the trees toward me. A heavy-set older couple, both wrapped in winter gear, both red in the face and clearly furious. The man positioned himself directly in front of me, pointed one thick finger at my chest, and informed me in the loudest possible voice that I was absolutely not permitted to cut down these trees. I told him, quite calmly, that actually I was permitted to cut down these trees. I produced the paperwork. He snatched it out of my hand and threw it on the ground and stomped on it like a child throwing a tantrum. Now, I am generally the calmer of the two in our marriage. My wife, however, stepped forward and began addressing this man with a thoroughness and a passion that I will always be proud of. She covered everything: his presumption, his rudeness, his physical aggression toward her husband, the spit that had landed on her face during his yelling. She was magnificent. While I was quietly appreciating my wife's performance, I looked around for my son. My son was gone. So was the man's wife. I scanned the trees and caught sight of them in the distance. The woman was waddling at speed through the snow, dragging my young son along by his hand, and my son, bewilderingly, was not struggling or resisting. He was just trotting along beside her. I found out later that she had promised to take him to see Santa. He had gone willingly. I will let that sink in for a moment. The husband, realizing I had spotted what was happening, stepped into my line of sight to block my view. I pushed past him, wound up, and hit him as hard as I possibly could. He went down into the snow, bounced off a tree, and stayed there. I want to say that I felt some hesitation about that. I did not. My son was being dragged away by a stranger through a forest. I ran. The snow was deep and difficult, and this woman was surprisingly fast for someone of her build, but I was faster. I caught up, grabbed my son by the back of his coat, and swung him safely behind me. And then I put every bit of high school football training I had ever received into a full-body tackle that sent this woman face first into a pine tree. She did not get up. I dragged her back to where my wife had somehow managed to tie the husband to a tree using the roof rack straps from our car. The man was muttering something about a misunderstanding. Sure, a misunderstanding. This was before mobile phones were common, so my wife drove with my son to the nearest shop while I sat guard over the couple. I did not have enough rope for both of them, so I sat on the unconscious woman. That is a sentence I never expected to type, but there we are. Eventually, my wife returned with the police. Both individuals were loaded into the back of a cruiser. Nothing came of it. In the end, the officers offered to overlook the assaults I had committed if we agreed it was a misunderstanding and let the whole thing go. I was not going to prison over these people and leaving my son without his father. We let it go. I do wonder sometimes whether they tried something like that again, but there is only so much any one family can do against the terrible things in this world. I hope you enjoyed my little story. Remember, do not be afraid to tackle someone who is running away with your child. That is the lesson. Dad out. My son again. I have vague memories of the incident, mostly impressions of snow and confusion. The part about being lured away with the promise of seeing Santa is, unfortunately, something I do remember. I find it easier not to dwell on that particular detail. Story 7. The Buzz Lightyear that nearly got me killed. Are any of you old enough to have been a parent in the mid-90s? Then you already know what I'm going to say before I even say it. The year was 1996. My son was 5 years old that Christmas, and the one thing he wanted more than anything in the world was a talking 12-inch Buzz Lightyear doll. The hot toy of the season, the impossible-to-find toy of the season. If you were a parent in those years, the struggle was real, and it was exhausting, and there was a whole Hollywood film made around the same time that was essentially a documentary about the experience, except with more action sequences. I did not dress up in a Buzz Lightyear costume, but I did go to some lengths. My regular store visits came up empty week after week. The shelves were bare, the staff were apologetic, and the scalpers in the classified ads were asking anywhere from $100 to nearly $200 for a toy that retailed at $25. I had 3 children. I could not spend that kind of money on a single gift for one of them without the whole Christmas budget collapsing. So, I resigned myself sadly to the idea that the Buzz Lightyear was simply not going to happen this year. And then I opened the classified ads one more time, and there it was. Buzz Lightyear, $40, from a private seller. I figured it had to be sold already. It was too good to be true. I called anyway. The woman who answered was a grandmother. She had bought the toy herself after seeing on the television that it was the must-have gift of the season. She had thought it would make the perfect present for her 12-year-old grandson. Her daughter had gently explained that 12 was perhaps a bit old for it. Rather than returning it to the store, she had listed it in the classifieds. Her son-in-law had suggested asking $100. She had lowered it to $40 because she could not bring herself to take advantage of desperate parents. She needed me to come to her home to collect it, as she did not drive. Everything in me said this woman was exactly who she sounded like. And I was right. Her home was warm and covered in family photographs and had the particular comfortable quality of a house that has been well loved for many decades. She gave me something warm to drink. She brought out the Buzz Lightyear still in the store bag, still in perfect condition. We talked for a little while. When she grew tired, it was nearly 8 o'clock and older people keep earlier hours. I paid her $40, offered her $50, which she refused, shook her hand, and left with the feeling that some people in this world are genuinely, uncomplicated good. I walked down the front steps toward my car. 3 figures in balaclavas were waiting for me on the sidewalk. They were young, I could tell from their voices, even muffled behind the masks. Teenagers, maybe. They started shoving me immediately, grabbing at the bag, demanding to know what was in it and whether it was worth anything. I tried appealing to their human side. I told them it was a Christmas toy for my 5-year-old son, that I had gone through considerable effort to find it, that it meant a lot. They laughed, actually laughed. And then they circled me and began pulling at the bag in earnest. I thought about fighting back. I was not a small or weak man in those days, and 3 teenagers should not have posed an overwhelming problem. But something stopped me. The fear of what it would look like, a grown man beating up a group of kids days before Christmas, and the fear that things might escalate in a direction I could not control, and then they converged on me all at once. My grip on the bag failed. I did not understand what had happened at first. I felt a strange cold sensation in my side and could not immediately identify it. I saw one of them grab the bag. I saw them all looking at each other with expressions that shifted from triumph to something close to horror. One of them said, in a shaken voice, that they wanted to know who had done it, and then they ran. The burning came seconds later. Then the wetness under my hand when I reached down. One of them had stabbed me, over a toy, over a Buzz Lightyear doll. I collapsed on the sidewalk and called for help as best I could. Someone nearby heard me quickly, and the paramedics arrived in short order. The knife had not gone deep. My thick winter coat had absorbed much of the force, and the damage was to muscle and tissue rather than anything vital. A few days of pain, some stitches, and a health insurance claim. No lasting damage. But my son was not going to get his Buzz Lightyear that Christmas. My wife and I sat him down and told him the truth. All of it. He was 5 years old, and I half expected tears, but what I got instead was a kind of quiet grace that still moves me when I think about it. He said he understood. He said he was glad I was okay. He said he would be happy with the other things on his list. Christmas came and went, and it was wonderful despite everything. And then, about a week after New Year's, I was in a store and I happened to see a single Buzz Lightyear sitting on a shelf. Just sitting there, alone, as if it had been waiting for me. The desperate holiday rush was over. I bought it on the spot. My son finally got his Buzz Lightyear, a little late but no less beloved for it. And that year, I made a quiet personal decision to lean heavily into video games for future Christmases. Stay safe out there, everyone. Even 30 years later, the sidewalks can be dangerous. Story 8. Trapped in the blizzard on Christmas Eve. Do you remember the great Oklahoma blizzard of 2009? I was caught in it, right in the middle of it, out on the road, alone. I had been at a Christmas party hosted a good distance from home, and I was driving back on Christmas Eve when the snow began. The radio reception was patchy and cutting in and out, but the messages coming through were consistent and urgent. Stay indoors, do not drive, do not be on the roads. Very helpful advice for someone who was already halfway through a drive with nowhere to stop. The snow got heavier, then it got much heavier. Visibility dropped until I could barely see the road ahead of me, and I made the decision to pull over rather than risk continuing. I thought I had found a safe spot on the side of the road. What I had actually found was a snowdrift. The car tipped sideways and slid into a ditch. Within seconds, snow was piling against the windows, covering the car. I was stuck. The engine could not free me. My cell phone had no signal out here in the countryside. The blizzard that year, I later learned, reached 14 inches of snow. I was stuck in it, alone, in a ditch, on Christmas Eve. My boyfriend was at home waiting for me. He worked as a paramedic and had stayed on shift rather than take Christmas Eve off. He did not want to leave his colleagues short-staffed on a holiday. I thought about him sitting at home not knowing where I was. I thought about what the night was supposed to look like, and I sat in the dark, tilted car and wept. I gathered everything I could find in that car, blankets, spare jackets, anything soft or insulating, and wrapped myself up as thoroughly as possible. I allowed myself occasional short bursts from the heater, but I did not know how long the battery would hold, and I had to be careful. When the heater ran, it melted a little of the snow from the windows, giving me brief moments of visibility before the white closed back in again. Time stopped making sense. Minutes felt like hours. I drifted in and out of sleep, and I am not certain I always knew the difference between waking and dreaming. At one point, I turned the heater on for longer than usual, and as the snow cleared slightly from the window, I saw someone outside. A figure. They were wearing what appeared to be animal skins, deer hide, I thought, and they were moving through the trees at the edge of the road, moving strangely, half concealed, like they did not want to be seen but could not help looking toward the car. I banged on the window. I shouted. I could not open the door without letting the snow in. The figure eventually came close enough to tap on my window, and then they turned and ran without a word, and all I saw was a face. Human, dirty, difficult to read in the half-light. I have never found a rational explanation for this. Oklahoma is not the wilderness of northern Europe. It was a highway. But I was also by that point developing hypothermia, which does interesting things to perception and memory. I do not know what I saw. What I do know is that somewhere in the back of my mind, something recognized the symptoms of what was happening to my body. Hypothermia makes people feel warm when they are anything but. I noticed I was starting to feel too hot. I noticed I was beginning to remove the layers I had wrapped myself in. Some quiet, frightened part of my brain recognized this as deeply wrong and tried to sound an alarm. And then the light came. Not angels, not a dream. A rescue truck, cutting through the blizzard with its headlights blazing like something from a story. I spent Christmas Day in the hospital, being treated for severe hypothermia. My boyfriend did not leave my side. He brought some of my gifts to my hospital bed. And strangely, inexplicably, it was one of the best Christmas days of my life, because the night before, I had been completely certain that I was not going to survive it. Not being dead in a snowy ditch on Christmas morning turns out to be one of the greatest gifts imaginable. Thank you so much for spending this time with us tonight, friends. These stories are a reminder that the holidays, for all their beauty and warmth, also bring out the most complicated parts of human nature, the best, the worst, and everything in between. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who would appreciate it. And if you are not already subscribed, please go ahead and do that now. Tap the bell so you are notified when new stories go live. We work hard to bring you stories worth staying up for. What do you think about the stories tonight? Which one stayed with you the longest? Which one surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments below. We genuinely love hearing from you, and this community is one of the most thoughtful and warm corners of the internet. We will be back soon with more stories, and until then, if you hear footsteps on your roof this Christmas, maybe just call the police before you investigate. Just to be safe, take good care of each other.